In this video, we're going to talk about how to differentiate x to the power of 2. In the previous video, we talked about how to differentiate simple function using the first principle method. So if you're yet to watch the previous video, I advise you to go back and watch the previous video, as it will help you to get a clear and good understanding of this particular example. So go back, I'll leave a link in the description, so you go back and watch the video before you come back and watch this one. Thank you. In this example, we're given that y is equal to x raised to the power of 2. So to solve this example, first we follow the steps as illustrated in the previous video. The first step, we add delta to the both sides of the equation. Adding delta to the left hand side, we have y plus changing y. Adding on the right hand side, we have open brackets x plus changing x, and you close your brackets, or squared. Why it's squared is that if you look at the equation, you see from the left hand side, you have to add delta y to the left hand side, and on the right hand side you add delta x, but in this case the x is squared. That's why we had to square everything. So the next thing we have to do, we have to expand the brackets. Expanding the brackets, we have y plus changing y, then expanding this bracket, we have x plus delta x. You close the bracket, you open another bracket, x plus delta x. So looking at this, you see that by the time you multiply this by this, you still arrive at this. So it's simply the same thing, it's just simple factorization. So the next thing we have to do, we have to open the bracket further. So opening the bracket further, we have y plus changing y is equal to, opening this bracket, what you have to do, you pick s, you multiply x through to the second bracket, then you now pick delta s and multiply it through with every element on the second bracket. So multiplying with x, we have x multiplied by x, we have x squared. You put the positive sign, then x multiplied by delta x, you have x delta x. Then we're done with the multiplication for x. Then multiplying delta x by x, we now have x delta x. Then multiplying delta x by delta x, we now have, you put your positive sign, so now have delta x all squared. So the next thing we have to do, we have to move y to the right hand side. Moving y to the right hand side, we now have changing y is equal to x squared plus, looking at this equation, you realize that you have x delta x and another x delta x. So by the time you add the both of them, you now have 2x delta x and you now have delta x squared. Put your positive sign. Recall we are moving y to the left hand side, to the right hand side, so we now have minus y. So the next thing we have to do, we have to replace y with x squared. Looking at the equation, y is equal to x squared, so we have to replace this y with s squared. Replacing y with s squared, we have changing y is equal to x squared plus 2x delta x plus delta x squared minus, when we replace y with s squared, we now have minus s squared. Looking at the last equation, you see that s squared can actually cancel s squared. That is s squared minus s squared, which is equal to 0. So you cancel out the both s squared. Cancelling the s squareds, we now have changing y is equal to 2x delta x plus delta squared x. So the next thing we have to do now is to divide both sides by delta x. Dividing both sides by delta x, we have changing y all over changing x now is equal to, looking at this, you see that delta s is common between the two equations on the right hand side. So we factor out delta x and we now have delta x, we open brackets, then we put in our 2x plus delta x recall we are dividing by delta x, so we also divide the right hand side by delta x. So having done this, you see that delta x can actually cancel delta s on the right hand side. So the next thing we have to do, delta s will cancel each other, so we are now left with changing y all over changing x is equal to, when the both delta x cancel out, we're now left with what is in the brackets. So we now have 2x plus changing x. So the next thing we have to do, we have to take the limit as delta x tends to 0. Taking the limit simply means that anywhere you see delta x, we'll remove it, in the sense that delta x tends to 0. It's not actually 0, but it tends to a value close to 0. So anywhere we see it, we have to remove it on the right hand side. Y on the left hand side, you see that changing y all over changing x, taking the limit will change this changing y over changing x to dy dx. So taking the limit in this case, as delta x tends to 0, we now have dy over dx is equal to, the 2x does not have any delta x value. The 2x does not have delta x, so we have to write it the way it is. Y, this other one, look at the cursor, you see the other one, delta x. Like I said, taking the limit as delta x tends to 0, so we have to remove this delta x as it tends to 0. So what we are left with is 2x, which is the final answer. It's very easy. What I just want you to understand is that from here, we take the limit as delta x tends to 0. And what taking the limit entails is that this changing y over changing x, in this case on the left hand side, taking the limit will change it to dy dx as we have seen in the last equation. The changing y over changing x will change to dy dx, and on the right hand side, taking the limit simply means that anywhere you see change in x, you remove it as it tends to 0. Why we have 2x here is because the 2x has no delta x value. The 2x has no delta x value, so we'll just represent it the way it is. So that's why we have our 2x. Why the delta x here will disappear? Because it tends to 0. So having said that, this is the final answer for this equation, for this example. If you find this video helpful, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell and set it to all, so you get notifications whenever I upload new videos. Thank you. Are you a student looking for the right place to learn and connect with friends with similar mindsets? Or are you good at maths, looking for a platform to earn money with your knowledge? Or are you looking for a platform where you can drop any question and get it solved in minutes? Visit our website www.vinstech.com and sign up for our premium services and start learning and earning. Check the link to our website below in the description of this video, and I promise you, you won't regret it.